All right, welcome to this Come Follow Me episode. This is 3rd Nephi, chapters 1 through 7. Before we get started, I'd like to just put a little shout out here to the Quick Study Group. This is a study group that we hold every single week. It is on Saturday mornings. It is something that you subscribe to if you want to be a part of it. We have a portal that is for the members of the study group. And if you are a subscriber, you have access to every week's materials and resources, annotated scriptures, PowerPoints, references that are all archived into this Quick Study Group portal. So even if you can't make it on a Saturday morning, it is always in there for you in that portal. But we're able to dive deep into the scriptures and pull out some very rich treasures that we obviously don't have time for in a podcast like this. In addition, we go over the 4 interpreters and the quick principles a little more in depth and more practice with them so that we can show you and teach you how to look at the scriptures through these filters. So I highly recommend that you go to quickmedia.com and go to the study group page and look into that a little bit more and see if you don't want to just try it out. We've got members from all over the world. People are able to participate or not participate. Our goal here is to really arm you with the ability to look at the scriptures in a deeper manner. All right, 3rd Nephi. We're going through chapters 1 through 7 here. Let's dive right into the scriptures. Nephi, who we've been talking about, had given charge of the records to his son Nephi. And you notice here as you go through the Book of Mormon, you always find this trace here of where are the plates? Where are the records? Who's in charge of them? And the nice thing about this is we get kind of this scribal, priestly DNA of the Book of Mormon going all the way through the narrative, all the way up into Moroni. And then, of course, we know what happens with Moroni and Joseph Smith. This is a very important thing because unlike the Bible, especially the Old Testament, these records are constantly in the custody of a prophet of God without a separate agenda focused on the doctrine of Christ. So where are we at here? Well, if we look up at the top of the chapter summary here, we see we are at AD 1, right? This is the year that Jesus Christ is going to be born. And what is the environment? Well, we've had Samuel the Lamanite that came 5 years previous, got up on the wall, left, prophesied about all these signs that would be coming, prophesied about the light that would last from the day to the night to the day. And we're told here that there began to be greater signs and greater miracles wrought among the people. So this outpouring of the Spirit, this outpouring of the power of God is coming out upon the land. But the signs for some, well, many are probably rather callous to these signs at this point. And of course, they're looking for the big sign, the sign of Christ's birth. It says here in verse 5, but there were some who began to say that the time was past for the words to be fulfilled, which were spoken by Samuel the Lamanite. So, for whatever reason, there's some people that are reasoning through this and saying, well, here's the calendar. Here's when we think this should have happened. Why hasn't this happened yet? And in verse 6, and they began to rejoice over their brethren, saying, behold, the time is past, and the words of Samuel are not fulfilled. Therefore your joy and your faith concerning this thing hath been vain. So you can just imagine this group that has been anti-Christ is becoming more and more emboldened as they feel that the time may have passed for the sign of Samuel the Lamanite. This is the climax of this whole fight that we've seen between the Lamanites and the Nephites, the dissenters and the Lamanites and then the Nephites, of this division, this conflict, this theological conflict with the doctrine of Christ. And here it is, coming to a head. And you can imagine each one of these groups clinging on to their traditions and their beliefs, knowing that this manifestation of this great light in the sky at night was going to determine whether or not all of these centuries of belief were really true. And of course they were, but now they're all looking forward to this sign. So a lot of people, because of this, as this talk is going out, a lot of people are they're losing heart, right? Even if they're believers, they're starting to lose heart, wondering if this is actually going to happen. Of course, that's something that happens with us if we're looking for something, an answer to a prayer, a principle that we're told should manifest in a certain way. Is it really going to happen? So we find out here in verse 9, it says, "Now it came to pass that there was a day set apart by the unbelievers, that all those who believed in those traditions." Now you think about the day, there's probably something special about that day. It's not random, right? For whatever reason, they're probably picking a day, maybe something on the calendar that would be important. That all those who believed in those traditions should be put to death, except the sign should come to pass, which had been given by Samuel the prophet. Imagine this scenario here. They want to put them to death for their belief. All of this emotion and this belief that has been built up on both sides of this point here. And you can see the unbelievers just waiting for this test. And so Nephi sees this, he's sorrowful, and on behalf of his people, he cries out for those who are about to be destroyed because of their faith in the tradition of their fathers. All right, think about your own testimony here. Think about the history of the church and the issues that have come up with that. Think about the records of Joseph Smith and his testimony with the first vision and with Moroni and the translation process of the Book of Mormon and of the Book of Abraham and the Book of Moses. Right? These are all part of our tradition, the tradition of our fathers. Can there be something pushed up against that? Well, of course, there is. There's quite a bit. And so those are traditions of our fathers that we are hanging tight to. And so as he's praying, the voice of the Lord comes to him and says to him, "Lift up your head and be of good cheer. For behold, the time is at hand, and on this night the sign be given. And on the morrow come I into the world." So you can see, what is Nephi doing here? He sees it's the last day. If this doesn't happen now, then all of my people here are going to be destroyed. They're all going to be killed. So of course, he's fervently praying for them. Please make this happen. He says, "On the morrow I come into this world to show unto the world that I will fulfill all that which I have caused to be spoken by the mouth of my holy prophets." Right? Again, this tradition that all of the holy prophets have held on to with the doctrine of Christ. Here it is. Jesus is going to be born of Mary. And it says here, "And it came to pass that the words which came unto Nephi were fulfilled, according as they had been spoken. For behold, at the going down of the sun, there was no darkness. And the people began to be astonished because there was no darkness when the night came." Now, we don't know exactly what this is. It could be the comets that Nibley talks about. It could be a supernova. It could be some kind of astral phenomenon. And it may very well be correlated with the star of Bethlehem, which, by the way, seemed to be in the sky for a very long period of time. It's what guided the Magi, which happened up to a couple of years after the birth of Christ. And so there were many who had not believed the words of the prophets, who fell to the earth and became as if they were dead. You can imagine they're almost this hope, this glee that the sign isn't coming, right? Because why? Because they're justified, right? Again, they're religious. They're religious. They just deny the doctrine of Christ. They want to be right. For they knew that the great plan of destruction which they had laid for those who believed in the words of the prophets had been frustrated. For the sign, the mark, which had been given was already at hand. And they began to know that the Son of God, that's the right title for this circumstance, must shortly appear, Yea, in fine, all the people upon the face of the whole earth, from the west to the east, both in the land north and in the land south, were so exceedingly astonished that they fell to the earth. And then down in 21, a little more descriptive here, and it came to pass also that a new star did appear, according to the word. So now many believe, they see this, they are frightened, they're astonished. But of course, even with this, immediately we're told that from this time forth began to be lying sent forth among the people by Satan to harden their hearts to the intent that they might not believe in those signs and wonders which they had seen. Why would they do this? Why not just submit? Why not just say, wow, I was wrong. I am so happy about this. I can know that this is true now. But no, right? They want to be right. They want their religion to run supreme. And they want to be justified in all that they have been laying up here. But the more part of the people did believe and were converted unto the Lord. And they have peace in the land for the most part. There's some contention here because some believe they no longer had to follow the law of Moses, right? What would have been taught at that time is that the law of Moses would be fulfilled with the coming of Christ. But specifically, it is not done until the last sacrifice is made, and that's the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Then it is all fulfilled. And so they have more peace after this once those individuals are convinced about when the law of Moses will be fulfilled, except for some of the Gadianton Robbers, right, who caused some problems that dwelt up in the mountains. And regardless of this great sign, there are more and more dissensions now from the Nephites up to the Gadianton Robbers into the wilderness. We see just how much a sign matters. Right? Everyone, show me this first, then I'll believe. No, it's just not the case. It's not how it works. It's about how our attitude is. What is our faith like? The signs really don't make a lot of changes, not long term typically. We're told here another interesting point here. The Lamanites, some of the Lamanites become sad because their children grow up here. They become mature. And then it tells us that many of them are led away by some who were Zoramites. Remember, the Zoramites are the ones that are at the very southern end of the Nephite nation, down at the border area with the Lamanites. So there would probably be a lot more contact between especially the Zoramites and the Lamanites. And so they're led away by the Zoramites to become Gadianton Robbers. Well, these signs among all the people continue, right? But again, they become callous to it. It's like, yeah, we don't care. It's all of these signs in the heavens are happening. And it's like, oh, that again, right? Whatever is going on here in the sky, meteor showers, again, supernovas, whatever's happening here, they're less and less impressed. And they began, it says here in verse 2, imagining up some vain things in their hearts, that it was wrought by men and by the power of the devil to lead away and deceive the hearts of the people. And thus did Satan get possession of the hearts of the people again, insomuch that he did blind their eyes and lead them away to believe that the doctrine of Christ was a foolish and a vain thing. So again, we get this impact right into the doctrine of Christ being born. Right? That's the big beginning of the doctrine of Christ. And Satan knows that he's going to come into the world, right? And that he has come into the world. So now he's got to do everything he can, well, just like he always does. Just like the force has always been there to deny Christ, regardless of the signs. And then we quickly move through time here. We're already now at 9 AD, 9 years from the time Christ came and the sign was given. The Gadianton Robbers continue to be strengthened by more and more dissenters. And we're told here that all the Lamanites who had become converted unto the Lord did unite with their brethren, the Nephites, and were compelled for the safety of their lives and their women and their children to take up arms against these Gadianton Robbers. So We're getting a clear divide here that is not among the same political divides that we've had previously, or even the same peoples. Right? The political lines here are being drawn completely based on theology, on the religions. And they take up the arms. Why? To protect themselves against the Gadianton robbers and to maintain their rights and the privileges of their church and of their worship and their freedom and their liberty. So they don't have a choice except to gather here. In 14 and 15 here, we're told, and it came to pass that those Lamanites who had united with the Nephites were numbered among the Nephites. And their curse was taken from them, and their skin became white like unto the Nephites. So how much do we take this literally? How much do we take this at face value? Their skin color all of a sudden began to change. Right? This isn't over generations, like new children being born and they're intermarrying with the Nephites. That has nothing to do with this. Right? Again, I think we need to look at this like their countenance. Their countenance becomes white, which means pure. The next verse here says, and their young men and their young daughters became exceedingly fair. And they were numbered among the Nephites and were called Nephites, and thus ended the 13th year. And so the Gadianton robbers are trying to move in on their lands, but they get pushed back out. But the Gadianton robbers are gaining more and more of an advantage. It's looking a little bleak for the Lamanites / Nephites. And in chapter 3, we get another epistle. We haven't seen this for a little bit. We had all the epistles before between Captain Moroni and Pahoran and Helaman of the 2,000 stripling warriors. But here we get an epistle from the leader of the Gadianton robbers. This is Gadianton. And he's sending this to Liconius, the chief judge of the Nephites. And Gadianton basically throws out a threat. He says, hey, look, you're doing a great job defending yourself against us. But this isn't going to last very long. I'm going to come down with my army in the next month. If you do not surrender yourselves unto us, and by the way, if you surrender yourselves, I swear unto you with an oath that we will make you our brothers, our sisters. You will not be our slaves, but you will also enjoy our secret works. What does probably Mormon really mean about this secret works? Well, he's talking about their religion, right? This is what we get here in 9. He says, behold, I am Gadianton, and I am the governor of the secret society of Gadianton. He says, which society and the works thereof I know to be good, right? They believe in what they're doing. They are religious. This is based off of a new morality, just like we saw previously in Zarahemla with those that were against Samuel the Lamanite. They feel justified in what they are doing. And he says, in these works, we know that they are good and they are of ancient date, and they have been handed down unto us. Interesting. Right? So we might look at this kind of like the core of their religion, their oaths, their temple type of worship, right, is the core of their doctrine, but it does not include the doctrine of Christ, which of course was really what the temple was all about. That's how I see it. So they know it's good and they know it's ancient. And therefore, what is he saying? This supersedes anything that you believe in. This supersedes any of your scriptures. And they may even believe in the scriptures. So Liconius has got to figure out what to do here. What is he going to do? And he decides that they're going to gather. Just as the robbers of Gadianton have gathered in the wilderness, he's going to have people from all of the villages and cities gather together into 1 or 2 places of defense. So they bring their women, their children, their flocks, their herds, their substance, and they leave their land. Now, for the Nephites, they had as their chief captain someone named Gidgiddoni. And this is just an interesting tidbit we get in verse 19 here in chapter 3. It says, now it was the custom among all the Nephites to appoint for their chief captains, save it were in their times of wickedness, someone that had the spirit of revelation. Think of it going all the way up into Mormon and Moroni at the end of the Book of Mormon, right? They had the spirit of revelation. Even as wicked as the people were, at least there, they held on to that tradition. Therefore, this Gidgiddoni was a great prophet among them, as also was the chief judge. So fortunately, they have great leadership. And the people say, look, we want to go up and attack in the wilderness, go up against the Gadianton robbers. And Gidgiddoni says, no, right? We're going to lose. We're going to be slaughtered. So instead, they're going to build up these defenses. They stay in these gathering areas until they've gone forth to the place which had been appointed that they should gather themselves together to defend themselves against their enemies. And here are the two places. They're to gather at the land of Zarahemla and the land which was between the land Zarahemla and the land Bountiful, which is where the temple is. Yea, to the line which was between the land Bountiful and the land Desolation. It's kind of interesting, you think about gathering in our time, right? And you think about the church when it started off. Well, there was a huge exodus from other places to gather into one place at first, right? Whether it was Ohio and Missouri and different parts of Missouri, and then finally Nauvoo. And then, of course, it's to Salt Lake, the Salt Lake Valley, and the gathering there. So it's the exact opposite. We don't have a diaspora, a Mormon diaspora, really, until after they've been well established in the Salt Lake Valley, for the most part. So eventually the Gadianton robbers come down out of the wilderness in the mountains to the lands there in the Nephite nation. What do they find? Well, they find an empty land. We're told there were no wild beasts, no game in those lands, which had been deserted by the Nephites, and there was no game for the robbers save it were in the wilderness where they came from. So again, you've got a society, the secret society, has a bit of a problem here because they're not really workers. They're not civilizers. They're not city builders. They're not based on agriculture, which you need to be to have land. They rely on all of the wild beasts in the wilderness. So if you don't have the food source, what are you going to do? If you can't pillage and rob those that have everything in the lands, you have no resources. They likely don't want to settle and all of a sudden start a farm. And even if they did, they're going to be in trouble for a while without the wild beasts. And so we're told here in verse 3 of chapter 4, and the robbers could not exist, save it were in the wilderness for the want of food. For the Nephites had left their lands desolate and had gathered their flocks and their herds and all their substance, and they were in one body. So it's a very smart tactic here to protect everybody. They don't need to stretch their defenses out. And it goes right along again with the idea of this gathering, right? There is a power, there is a strength in gathering the saints. We are gathering Israel today. So the only way that the Gadianton robbers are going to be able to make their plans work, unless they're just going to stay on their own in the wilderness, is to attack the Nephites, bring them back to the lands, and then be tyrants over them. Bring back their food, their reserves, their herds, their wild animals, and they're probably going to want their labor. We're told here that the Nephites / Lamanites here had gathered up enough to subsist for the space of 7 years. Hey, you can just see the Sunday school talks happening here as they give the story of their father, one of their patriarchs, Joseph, where he saved up all the grain for 7 years in order to last for a 7-year drought. So Gadianton and the Gadianton robbers decide they're going to go and attack the Nephites in their strongholds. And they come with their heads shorn, they come with lambskins around their loins that are dyed in blood, and they've got head plates, and they're very fierce looking. And the Nephites are fearful of them. But we get something very important here. We can talk about, where we place our compassion as being very important. We can put it in the wrong place and sympathize primarily in the wrong area with something, with results that are disastrous without putting reason behind it. Well, we can do the same thing with fear. We can put it in the wrong place. So they're fearful of the Gadianton robbers, but we're told here that for the Nephites did not fear them, but they did fear their God and did supplicate him for protection. So as fearsome as the Gadianton robbers appeared, this problem, this obstacle, this threat, as we all have in our own lives, the way I would interpret it is there's certainly a fear there, but what they really feared, if there was one thing they were going to fear, it was God. And again, fear isn't trembling as we think of fear when we talk about the fear of God. It's what do we respect more? What do we pay attention to the most? What is going to drive our decision the most? Is it the robbers or is it God? What do we trust in most? So they end up receiving the Gadianton robbers in battle with putting their faith, their trust in God. And we're told here, and sometimes I think that these are just phrases that we hear over and over again, but this could be true based on how the circumstances are set up here with these massive gatherings. You can imagine, right, where you typically have the war chapters, and it's one of the smaller cities here, one of the smaller cities over here, and these battles come about, and there are certainly thousands, and sometimes when they're around the land of Zarahemla, there might be tens of thousands of deaths. But here you have all of the Gadianton robbers, you have all of the Nephites and Lamanites that have gathered together here in these two close areas. So you have massive populations that are going after each other. And we're told that great and terrible was the slaughter thereof, insomuch that there never was known so great a slaughter among all the people of Lehi since he left Jerusalem. That would make sense. Again, think of these events and the repercussions of all these things as now we're getting ready, not for the birth of Christ, but for the visit of the resurrected Christ. Many that would have had that chance in mortality are going to exit mortality here in this battle. So the battle takes place, the robbers are starting to lose, they're very weary and fatigued. So the Nephites pursue the Gadianton robbers, and in that pursuit, they get Gadianton, their leader, and they slay him. And I like this little phrase here, it just says, and thus was the end of Gadianton the robber. And I like this little phrase here, it says, and thus was the end of Gadianton the robber. So the Nephites then eventually come back. They stay the next couple of years in these gathered places of defense. And for a couple of years, there is no contention. But finally, the Gadianton robbers come down with another plan. They've got a new leader whose name is Zemnariah. And Zemnariah's idea here is that they're going to lay siege around these areas, cut them off from any kind of substance and from the privileges, as they call it, of their lands. In other words, they would have been able, if the Gadianton robbers are way out in the wilderness, right there, they can't go into the lands where the Nephites came from because there's no food. There's no wild beasts. They have to go back to the wilderness for sustenance. So the Nephites are able to go out of the places of gathering. They're able to go back to some of their lands, maybe get some of the things that they need every once in a while, bring more resources, more whatever they need, buckets, tools, etc. So what Zemnariah wants to do is cut them off from being able to leave and from getting any other food. But of course, this is an advantage. It's very interesting the way this works. This is a huge advantage to the Nephites. Why? Because remember, they've already got their food storage. They've built up their 7-year food storage. You thought 2 or 3 years was a lot. What do the Gadianton robbers have? Whatever they brought with them. They've got nothing. And where are they? They're in places where there's not enough food to fill the tummies of a large army. There's no set agriculture for them to go harvest. There aren't enough animals around in this area. They're in trouble. They've only got so much, and what will they have to do? Well, if they can't get into the defenses of the Nephites and their provisions, they're going to have to hightail it back to the wilderness where the wild beasts are. Now, even there in the wilderness, the wild beasts are becoming scarce. Right? The population of the Gadianton Robbers has become too large, and they've disrupted completely the ecosystem here. And so even if you've got some people heading out and then coming back with wagons or whatever that they're pulling back, bringing more meat, well, they're running out of it. They're in a real predicament here. So they've got to come up with a new plan. And so what they decide to do is to give up on the siege here of the Nephites and Lamanites and to go off to the land northward where they can possibly find some more food. So they begin their retreat. Now, Gidgiddoni knows the plans of Zemnariah and what they're going to do. So at night, he sends a big portion of his army ahead of them to march in front of them to meet them when they wake up in the morning on to their front, to the north. And then he sends another portion of his army to the rear, following the Gadianton Robbers. So when the Gadianton Robbers wake up and begin their march, well, in front of them, they've got the Nephites, Lamanites. Behind them, they've got the Nephites, Lamanites. And a lot of the Gadianton Robbers give up. They give up their weapons of war and they just give up. And everybody who doesn't give up, they fight and they're slain. And here's what they do with Zemnariah. This is interesting. In verse 28, chapter 4, it says, "And their leader, Zemnariah, was taken and hanged upon a tree." What does that mean? We think of that probably more along the lines of a noose, right? But that's not necessarily what that means. Oftentimes when they talk about being hanged on a tree, they mean crucifixion of some sort. It doesn't have to be on a cross, right? Crucifixion was probably more commonly done. Well, I don't know that, but it was commonly done on a tree. And they would just nail up their arms up on different branches and their feet on the trunk. So it's very possible that Zemnariah here dies of crucifixion. And then after he dies, they cut the tree down and they say this: "May the Lord preserve his people in righteousness and in holiness of heart, that they may cause to be felled or fallen to the earth all who shall seek to slay them because of power and secret combinations, even as this man hath been felled to the earth." All right, that goes back to our idea of covenant and the penalties that go along with that. Right? There's a cutting. They're cutting the tree. It falls. And then they use that as the representation of the punishment of those that might come against them in the future. And then they cry with one voice, and I'm guessing this is some type of a ritualistic saying here: "May the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob protect this people in righteousness, so long as they shall call on the name of their God for protection." And the people are overjoyed that they are taken out of these circumstances that they have been in under this siege the whole time, this constant threat of the Gadianton Robbers. They're singing and praising their God for the great thing which he had done for them. And they cried, "Hosanna to the Most High God." And they did cry, "Blessed be the name of the Lord God Almighty, the Most High God." Right, so Hosanna, save us, or thou, you have saved us. Similar shout to what we have from the people at the triumphant entry of Jesus Christ into Jerusalem. And interestingly here, the people know that they were saved. They know it was because of their repentance and their humility that they had been delivered from an everlasting destruction. So it's nice to know that you've done that thing in faith and in trust to follow the right principles and do the right thing, and then you get this great reward at the end. We'll finish up with chapters 5, 6, and 7 in part 2. I'll talk to you next time.